Hello, and welcome to the Sketching Tips Guide. Let's begin by discussing sketching with simple shapes. An object that seems complex at first can be broken down into easier to understand lines and shapes, such as rectangles and circles. The tape dispenser above has complex curves and angles that can be broken down into simple, straight lines and concentric circles. The sketch may look messy at this point, but that's okay. Note how the complex curve of the top of the dispenser can be broken down into two angled lines and part of a circle. After you have the basic shape down, clean up the sketch by erasing any outlying line edges. You can start by detailing the sketch by adding in rounded corners and smaller details where appropriate. So now let's take a look at sketching with proportion. A tip to drawing correct proportions is to break the object down using a simpler component of the object. In this case, we'll start with the wheel of the car. In terms of the wheels, the car is about 3.5 wheels wide and 1.4 wheels tall. We can use these rough proportions to box in the object's proportional guidelines, as seen in the image. After breaking down the rough proportions, use simple lines to break the object down into simple shapes, just like we did in the previous section. After breaking the object down into simple shapes, you can start rounding out certain details, such as curved surfaces. Add in the rest of your details, and you're ready to shade in your sketch. So now let's take a look at sketching with curved objects. When drawing curved objects, using simple lines to break down a shape is simply not enough. A curved object, such as this cup, will not appear to have straight top and bottom edges, even when looked at directly at eye level. After using flat lines to box in the shape of the cup, you will need to curve the edges of a curved object to properly convey its shape. Remember to fill out the rounded edges of a curved object. Don't just stop at the flat, boxed-in sketch. Note the difference between the flat, red line and the curvature of the top edge of the cup. Note how the curvature persists in the bottom edges of the cup as well. Here's a hint for when you draw with curved edges. The curved edge of an object changes depending on how you are looking at it. The further away from the edge it is from your eye level, the more rounded it becomes. Note how the top of and/or the bottom of a hollow curved object forms an ellipse. This is visible at the top of the cup in the example above. Now let's talk about sketching with shading. Here's another tip. When shading with a pencil, try to avoid using the tip of your pencil's graphite and instead use the side of the graphite. Using the tip is what's pictured in the image to the left, versus shading with the side of the pencil is in the image to the right. If you're using a mechanical pencil, try wearing down the tip of your lead to an angle to simulate this. This covers areas easier and makes the shading smoother. Don't be afraid to use a wide range of values to create contrast, but don't overdo it. Not every object will use the full spectrum from black to white. Here's an example of values that may be used for a dark colored object, seen indicated by the blue on the left end of that color spectrum. Also to the right, you have an example of values that may be used for a light colored object at the upper end of the spectrum. Note that neither object uses the complete value spectrum as pictured. Very few items will use the full spectrum from white to black. Notably, metallic objects, dark colored objects with extremely bright lighting, etc. In the picture here, you see an indication of the light source. Where that light source directly hits the object becomes a bright white. Then we have values of gray, deepening all the way to black through the shading of the rest of the metallic object. Avoid coloring in objects with only one tone. Even flat objects have a range of values, even if it's just a small range. Also, avoid harsh blocks of highlight and shadow. This is unrealistic and makes things look cartoony. Lastly, avoid using flat gradients for shading curved objects. Note how for curved objects, the shading follows along the curve of the object and is not flat.